Welcome to the Pardes channel. Today, we explain Prophets Joshua chapter 12 in a clear and simple way, step by step. This is absolutely one of those monumental chapters because it serves as the grand summary, the whole shebang, of all the military campaigns we've been following up to this point. We're going to look strictly at the text, following the verses exactly in order to really understand the who, what, where, and why of it all.
Here is our roadmap. First, the context of chapter 12. Second, Moses conquers the east. Third, Joshua conquers the west. Fourth, the 31 kings. Fifth, clarifications and explanations. And finally, simple, practical life lessons.
Section 1. Context of chapter 12. Transition and summary. So we're at this really pivotal transition moment right now in the text. The major wars of conquest have just concluded, and the dust is literally settling on the battlefield. This chapter is a deliberate pause. It's a pure historical roster. Now, I know it's super easy to just skim over lists of names and places, but this record is absolutely crucial. It's the definitive proof that the promises made to the Israelites about inheriting the land have actually been fulfilled through these specific, incredibly hard-fought victories.
Section 2. Moses conquers the east, verses 1-6. If you look closely at the text, there's this really beautiful structural contrast right from the start. The text deliberately separates the conquests into two distinct phases. First, we get the earlier eastern campaign led by Moses, and that's covered in verses 1-6. And then second, we see the subsequent western campaign led by Joshua, starting right down in verse 7. It creates a perfectly balanced historical record for us to follow. Let's look at that first campaign. Just two kings were defeated by Moses east of the Jordan River. Now, you might be thinking, well, that number seems pretty small compared to what comes later, right? But make no mistake, these were massive, deeply entrenched kingdoms, controlling vast territories, stretching all the way from the Arnon Gorge right up to Mount Hermon. These two monarchs were formidable. First up, we have Sihon, king of the Amorites, who was ruling from his capital in Heshbon. His territory extended from Aroer on the Arnon Gorge all the way to the Jabbok River. And second, we have Og, king of Bashan, who ruled in Ashtaroth and Edrei. His kingdom covered this huge northern region of Mount Hermon and Selakah. As verse 6 makes a point to note, Moses gave this massive eastern territory as a permanent possession to the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. Now, verse 4 drops this incredibly fascinating detail about King Og of Bashan, pointing out that he was one of the last of the Rephaim. To understand the simple, plain text here, the Peshat, we need to know who the Rephaim actually were. They were the formidable, ancient inhabitants of the land, historically described as people of literally giant stature. Knowing this really clarifies the incredible magnitude of defeating King Og. This wasn't just your standard battle. It was the toppling of a legendary, incredibly intimidating power. Section 3. Joshua conquers the west, verses 7 and 8. All right, shifting our focus across the river, we're introduced to Joshua's great inheritance, the varied lands west of the Jordan. And wow, the geography here was incredibly diverse. It stretched all the way from Baal Gad up in the north, way down to Mount Halak in the south. The Israelites fought through rocky hill country, the western foothills, the Arabah, mountain slopes, the desert, and the Negev. And throughout all those different terrains, they defeated 6 entrenched nations: the Hittites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. You've probably noticed the word Arabah popping up multiple times in the text, regarding both the eastern and western conquests. In simple terms, the Arabah is just the arid desert region. Specifically, it's that deep geological rift valley surrounding the Jordan River and stretching south toward the Dead Sea. Ensuring we grasp this geographical landscape makes these ancient biblical battles so much easier to visualize in our heads. Section 4. The 31 Kings, verses 9-24. 31. Let's just pause on that number for a second. This represents an absolutely astonishing total of individual city-state kings defeated by Joshua and the Israelites in a single sweeping campaign. Unlike the massive regional kingdoms of the east, Canaan was, scratch that, it was completely different. It was composed of dozens of heavily fortified independent city-states, and each and every one was ruled by its own king. The text actually lays out this unbelievable roster chronologically for us. In verses 9-13, we see the first 10. The kings of Jericho, Ai, Jerusalem, Hebron, Jarmuth, Lachish, Eglon, Gezer, Debir, and Geter.
Moving right along into verses 14 through 18, the list of toppled city-states continues with the kings of Hormah, Arad, Libnah, Adullam, Makkedah, Bethel, Tappuah, Hepher, Aphek, and Lasharon. It's so important to remember that every single name on this list represents a distinct battle, a heavily fortified city overcome and a really hard-fought victory for Israel.
And finally, in verses 19 through 24, Joshua defeats the kings of Medawan, Hazor, Shimron-Moron, Akashaph, Tanakh, Megiddo, Kadesh, Jokneam, Dor, Goyim, and Tirzah. Verse 24 perfectly concludes the entire ledger, bringing us to that grand total, 31 kings in all.
Section 5. Clarifications and Explanations.
To make sure we're getting the complete picture, let's translate two ancient names from the earlier verses into modern geography. Back in verse 3, the text references the Sea of Kinnereth, or Chinneroth, as an eastern boundary marker for the lands conquered by Moses. Simply put, this is just the ancient biblical name for the famous freshwater body we know today as the Sea of Galilee. And while we're in verse 3, the text also mentions the Sea of the Arabah, which it explicitly identifies as the Salt Sea. This refers to that massive body of water sitting way down in the deep Rift Valley, universally known in modern times as the Dead Sea. Understanding these two bodies of water, the Sea of Galilee up in the north and the Dead Sea down in the south, makes the ancient biblical borders incredibly easy to map out for ourselves.
Section 6. Simple, practical life lessons.
So, what does this all mean for us today? Even in a purely historical roster, there is deep, practical wisdom we can apply to our own self-improvement. First, acknowledge past victories. Just as the chapter starts by remembering Moses' victories in the east before ever listing Joshua's, we have to remember our own past successes. It gives us the courage we need for the future. Second, fight your battles step by step. Look, Joshua didn't defeat 31 kings in one afternoon, right? It was a methodical, verse-by-verse process. We have to take on our own challenges one by one. And third, give credit where it's due. The text meticulously names the leaders, explicitly honoring Moses and Joshua, who paved the way and accomplished the really hard work.
Section 7. Chapter Recap and Conclusion. To recap everything we've covered today, Chapter 12 is the definitive record of the conquest. It begins with the two massive Amorite kingdoms defeated by Moses in the east, and it concludes with the remarkable 31 independent city-states defeated by Joshua in the west. The stage is now exactly set for what comes next, dividing the land among the tribes of Israel. But as we look ahead, it leaves us with a really fascinating question. Once the battles are finally won and the land is officially yours, is the hardest part over, or is it actually just beginning? Thank you for learning with us. If this helped you understand the chapter better, like, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter.